Welcome to A Shelter in the Time of Storm. My name is Roger Comstock. I'm the minister for the Morrison Church of Christ in Morrison, Tennessee. I'm glad that you could be with us today, and as we've said with almost every program, our intent with this program is to try to help people maintain their faith, their trust in God through the storms of life, the difficult things that we face, and sometimes tragic things that we face. We've been privileged to be able in the last few programs to do some discussion, some visiting with some of our American heroes, the veterans that have served this nation. In today's program and in the last 2 or 3 programs, we've been able to have a representative, if you will, a veteran from every war, from the Second World War on up until the present wars going on in the Middle East, in Afghanistan and Iraq. Part of the reason is, one, I wanted people to see that these veterans have deal with the things that they face, some in direct combat, some in support roles, and they've dealt with the tragedies of being away from home and being in a combat situation. Our special guests today are Brother Doug Hobbs. He worships with us where I preach in Morrison, Tennessee, there at the Church of Christ in Morrison. And our other guest is Brother Glenn Woodlee. Brother Glenn is one of the elders for the church where I preach in Morrison, Tennessee. And I thank you to both of you for being here today, and thank you for your service to our nation. I appreciate both of you very much. Brother Glenn, I'll start with you. If you would, I know you served in the very first Iraq War, and if you would tell what your job was and what you did primarily during that time that you were deployed to Iraq.
We were activated in 90. My initial service was in the Army National Guard, and we were a round-out unit for the 62nd Engineers. They had disbanded a company and formed this guard unit to take its place. So we had to go complete the battalion. And our job, once we got into Saudi Arabia at first, before the ground war started, we were combat heavy engineers. We had both skills of buildings, and of course destroying them too. But we had heavy equipment to build roads and things of that nature. And our job consisted mainly of before the ground war started was for restoring buildings that were already there but had been let run down, that the military was using as base in what was known as King Khalid Military City. That was our main base camp before the ground war. And then just before the ground war, we were sent forward to build a road up to the Iraq border. And then, of course, after the ground war started, we went into Iraq, and all the way across there were 3 battalions given the job of building an access road across Iraq, and we stopped right on the edge of the Euphrates River Valley. And then part of our job in doing that, when the military branches went into Kuwait and drove the Iraq soldiers out of Kuwait, if they had have got back to the point that we were to be a blocking force to keep them from getting back to Baghdad.
I see.
And thank goodness the airstrikes on them pretty well took care of them, so we didn't have that to deal with. So we were basically a support type system, and the war, and not unlike the war that's going on over there now, or just finishing up, and then ours was a short war, so we didn't have
Right.
didn't have as much to deal with as they are or have been.
Yeah. About how long were you there?
We were there in country a little over 6 months.
I see. So the roads that you were building going toward Baghdad, is that?
Well, they were going not directly to Baghdad, but they were going to the Euphrates River Valley, which runs along from Kuwait up toward Baghdad and goes through there. Yeah.
So this would have been for supplies to be able to
Right.
be moved to the front line, or to the soldiers that were in the ground war, as you described.
Yeah, if the war had advanced to the point that they had got back to our point or past us, they would have had to bring supplies in on that road because there were no other roads. It's just open desert from there.
Just desert. And what did you rely on to maintain your faith while you were so far away from home and everything that was normal to you? Because you were in the National Guard, weren't you?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I grew up in a Christian home.
Right.
My parents gave me, a Christian upbringing, values, and all. And I had been in the church all my life.
Right.
And of course, I mainly relied on God when I got, any time when I got scared or concerned about my safety or the men that was with me. Just stop and talk to God a little bit.
Yeah.
That's my position. I was a platoon sergeant and a construction supervisor.
I see.
And I was in charge of a platoon of men.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had their safety to think about as well as my own,
Right.
more so than if I had been just a regular, private or whatever other rank.
Right.
So we had a lot of things that could have happened and could have gone wrong that could have cost men's life, but thank goodness we brought every man home with us.
Wow, well, that's great. And that's got to be a tremendous load on your mind and on your faith as well, to have literally be responsible for the physical lives of the men under you.
It is.
Yeah, an awesome responsibility. Brother Doug, I know you served in the Second World War, and you also served in the Korean War, didn't you?
Right. Yes, I was a gunner on B-24 during World War II, and throughout the preparations for going to the war, we had everything put in front of us that could possibly be that you needed to avoid. All the things of the world that we needed to avoid.
Right.
And not many of us avoided it,
Right.
I fear. And then we got to England and started flying missions into Germany, and it became pretty obvious that things weren't going as well as they might with each one of us. And I know that I talked to God, and I'm sure other folks did, but I'm also afraid that it wasn't effective. The reason I think it wasn't effective, that we weren't Christians and we had made no effort to be obedient.
Right.
And therefore I'm not sure that he heard our prayers.
Right.
Nevertheless, he was gracious enough to me to allow me to live long enough to change my direction and do what I feel like is making a serious effort to serve the Lord.
I appreciate that, and what I know of you, I believe you are making that effort, certainly as as
Well,
we all struggle together.
We hope so, but when, while we were flying missions, the losses of the 8th and the 15th Air Force were atrocious.
Really?
And if you're going to ever think about the hereafter or how I've lived or what am I going to do if I'm fatal, this is the time it's going to happen.
And you were where you were shot down
Over Hamburg, Germany.
Over Hamburg, Germany, and how did you have to parachute out, or did the plane? How did you survive being shot down?
We were hit heavily with anti-aircraft artillery, and 5 out of the 13 or so people that we had aboard were killed. And there was flames behind the airplane, probably 75 yards long.
Wow.
It was enough to upset your...
Kind of ruin your day, wouldn't it?
Yes, ruin your day. Anyway, that was the pitiful part of this, that the aircraft that were shot down, about 50% were fatal of the personnel.
Yes.
50% about were unfatal. But
so did you parachute out?
Parachuted out.
And you knew you knew right where you were. I mean, as far as you knew you were over enemy territory.
Yeah, I knew where we knew where we were. The aircraft was shot up, and the bailout preparation signal was given, but it was never completed. And finally, we had all we could take, and we left. And as I said, 5 people were fatal on it.
Yeah.
And I'm told, in fact, I have the pilot's records out of Washington, D.C., and it states that the aircraft was crash landed in the area, and I don't see how it's possible.
Really? What? How when you hit the ground? What? How long was it? Were you captured immediately?
Well, I hit the ground and I threw away whatever I had that I didn't want anyone to find.
Right.
So they could probably walk over and pick it up. But nevertheless, within 5 minutes,
Really?
a nice old German with a double-barreled shotgun greeted me.
A civilian? A civilian or a soldier?
Civilian.
Huh.
And he turned us over to the Gestapo, which scared me to death, but they were more reasonable than he was.
Really?
He was very unhappy with us.
Really? What? How long were you a prisoner of war?
9 months.
9 months.
Yeah.
And where were you? Were you there in Hamburg?
No, we were sent from Hamburg to Frankfurt to well, I can't think of the term. The interrogation center for all of the Air Force types was in the Frankfurt area. So we went there for interrogation, and then we were shipped out to our permanent camp. Ours was a place on the French border, and it didn't last very long, and we ended up being transported by train from there to due north of Posen, Poland, which was about a week's effort. And then in February of '45, we walked out of there, and some of us walked as far as to the Holland border. I hear rumors of this. It runs anywhere from 250 to 300, 400 miles.
Wow.
But there was no direct route. You just sort of meandered around.
Wow. How were you? Can you describe the living conditions and how you were treated while you were a prisoner of war?
Well, not as brutal as I once would have, because if you take into consideration what's going on,
Right.
you have to remember that if you were in their place, how you might feel.
Right.
And the biggest problem we had, I guess, was food.
Right.
The Germans didn't have any food. The German soldiers didn't have any food. Really, they were on starvation rations. And they didn't give us a lot of food.
Sure, sure.
And while we were on this march, we spent most of our time, when we weren't walking, in barnyards and barns and this sort of thing.
Just trying to scrounge up food?
No, that's where we were quartered when we
Oh, I
stopped.
see.
Instead
I
of
see.
being in a shelter of some sort, we'd be in the barn or in the barnyard.
I see. And why did they move you so much?
We were trying to avoid the Russians.
I see. And you were under German captivity for, you said, 9 months?
Yes, yeah,
But now you were also in the Korean War,
right.
and
We were in Air Resupply Group in Korea, a 119 Air Force outfit, and we supplied the troops with food, ammunition, clothing, gasoline, napalm, weapons, ammunition, the works.
And would you airdrop that into the?
Airdropped, or a lot of times we landed and offloaded it.
I see. And I know it's been interesting with several of you veterans that I've been able to talk to. You've all talked about the camaraderie, the brotherhood, if you will. And Brother Doug, I know there are not a lot of World War II veterans left, and especially not a lot of World War II POW left. And do you have any contact with maybe any of your fellow POWs?
The fellow POWs that I have known and had friends with, knew, are gone.
Are they? Yeah.
And I have one crew member from the airplane remaining, and he's 92 years old.
Wow.
I visited him last year.
Wow, that's great. Do you mind, how old are you?
Sir?
How old are you?
I'm 80. If I see May 10, I'll be 88.
Wow. Well, and it's been we enjoy one another because we kind of torment one another on a regular basis at home. But,
yes, sir.
And
I believe that's the case.
But I want you to know that truly that I do appreciate you for your service to the country, and I also appreciate you for your role as in our home congregation, and your faithfulness and your encouragement, and you and your family are very dear to me, and we enjoy the teasing one another, and that's a good thing and something we can share. And Brother Glenn, were you, when you were deployed in the Middle East, were you an elder in the church at the time?
No, I was a deacon in the church at the time.
I see.
I became elder sometime after return.
Right.
But you asked me earlier what kind of what I relied on over there.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Besides, being able to talk to God and feeling that He cared about me.
Right.
Before I left and after I got over there, I had, of course, had family that were concerned about my welfare and the others that were with me, and I had a lot of friends.
Right.
And they continually sent me stuff such as food and whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
Over there. If I needed anything, if I could get word back to my wife, I got abundance of it.
Wow, that's great. That's great. And I know you fellows you've heard some of the discussions we've had with other veterans, and now I don't know, when you were deployed, there wasn't the internet use at that time. That was probably was just a very, very new thing. That would have been 90.
That was in 90 and 91.
90 and 91.
Yeah.
And of course, I know, Brother Doug, were you able to get and send mail to your family members while you?
I was able to send it, but they never received but one letter, and I never received any.
Really? Is that the whole time, or just while you were a prisoner of war?
While I was a prisoner.
Really? Because I know personally from mission work that I've been able to be a part of through the years, I don't mind being away from home, but being able to have contact with home is a great, great blessing. And I know you've heard these other veterans talk about, like for example, on the internet, the use of Skype, to be able to sit in front of a camera and see your family members. I mean, that's a tremendous blessing for men, particularly men who are deployed, or not just men, but service people who are deployed, and being away from family. Can you talk about what was it like coming home, as far as adjustment back into day-to-day life?
Well, the people that met me at Fort Campbell, of course, most of them were from the church, their congregation and
Wow.
family, and they made it easier to come back and to fit into, former life before all the deployment
Right.
came about. There still is things that you remember, and as talked about earlier, things that happen that make you flash back to something that happened over there.
Right.
But as far as myself, I can say that fitting back into normal life, it was a lot easier than a lot of people from other wars, I think, have had.
Maybe because of the support group that you had around you?
Yes, I feel
yeah.
like that.
And Brother Doug, how old were you when you were captured?
19.
19. And now you retired. You told me the year.
Yes.
What year did you retire from the military?
63.
1963. And that was, how many years had you served?
20 years and 5 days.
Right down to, can you tell me that?
Well, Uncle was getting rid of all my old airplanes, and
I
I
see.
didn't want to try new ones, and I left.
I see. Do you remember when were you released? You said you walked to the Holland border.
Yeah.
And is that when you were released?
Well, we weren't released. We were deserted.
Oh, I see. They just
We
abandoned.
woke up one morning and there was nobody there but us.
So they basically ran for their lives and left you behind.
Exactly.
I see. And so, did you then from Holland, you were able to, of course, come back in contact with the U.S.
We
forces?
eventually got to Lucky Strike, France, which was the transit camp for ex-POWs, and were sent home.
And do you remember what was that like when you came home?
Oh, it was just like I expect heaven to be. I married my childhood sweetheart,
Wow.
and everything was going swimmingly.
Wow. And I know you were stationed in a number of different places around the world. Even I know I've heard you talk about being living in England while
Yeah.
you were in military service. I mean, this was after the war.
Yes.
And
yeah.
had your family with you and so forth?
Yes.
Uh,
I have a daughter that was born in Tachikawa, Japan. She was in high school before she could spell the name of her birthplace.
Well, that's interesting. And you know, it's good also for both of you. It's good that you can talk openly about those experiences, and that you can share them, and that you allow other people to benefit from your experiences, and both of you have been a blessing in my life, and I appreciate you. I appreciate you for your service to our nation. I appreciate you, as with the other men that I've visited with, I appreciate you for your service to God and your dedication to God. And Brother Doug, it was interesting how you talked about when you were in the war, you were not a Christian.
No.
And how old were you, or when did you become a Christian?
I'm glad you asked that.
That's okay.
Went to a meeting one night in Summitville, and my little 15-year-old daughter was added to the church.
Wow.
And I thought, oh boy, you got to do something about this.
Interesting.
So the next night I did. And I think it was in 59, but it may not have been.
But you know, that's interesting of what you had been through as a prisoner of war and in war, and yet it was, in essence, from what you're saying, was a child that led you to the Lord. I mean, you had heard the gospel and so forth, obviously.
Yeah.
But
well, I married a young lady whose mother and father were staunch
I see.
Christians.
And your wife was a Christian.
And I promised her I would go to church with her.
Wow.
And I kept it.
Well, good for you. I'm glad you did. I am.
Then when the time came, I was baptized into the church.
Great. You know, the blessings of being a child of God, the blessings of coming to a knowledge of the gospel and a knowledge of the truth of His Word, and the old saying, which is a Bible expression, a Bible term, that the truth will set you free, and coming to that knowledge and coming to a peace in your relationship with God. And that's part of what we want to accomplish in the idea behind this program. We are committed to the cause of our Lord as part of the Lord's church, the churches of Christ across this nation. You may have questions about your own salvation, about God, about the Bible. And I would encourage you to seek out a church of Christ in your community